Thanks for tuning in to TellyCast. Before you listen to the show, I wanted to let you know about our next event, the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. It's the only event in the UK exploring the opportunities, trends and commerce in digital-first video. It's happening on Thursday, November the 9th at London's BFI South Bank and features keynote addresses from TikTok, Snap and Banijay. Network with creators and industry leaders and experience panel sessions on funding, branded content, formats, the crossover between TV and social first video, and more. For tickets and more information, visit telecast.com/events. But hurry, last year's event sold out, so secure yours now. The TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. We'll see you there.
TellyCast.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another TellyCast. My guest on this week's show is UK-based producer Danny Fenton. In a wide-ranging chat, we discuss how he's keeping leading factual indie Zig Zag Productions afloat in the stormy seas of today's TV market. It's coming right up on this week's TellyCast. My guest on this week's show is boss of UK indie and renowned international TV exec, Danny Fenton from Zig Zag Productions. Hi, Danny. How are you doing?
It's good to be back. I think I may have been on one of the very first ever telecasts back in the days of the global pandemic, if you remember that.
I do.
And it seems like I'm back again to be the Grim Reaper.
It does feel like a lifetime ago. You're right. And you're right. I'll have to go back and find out exactly which show it was. But it's brilliant that you're finding time to have another chat for the show, Danny. Really appreciate your time. How are things with you? How's Zig Zag?
I'd be lying if I said it's been easy. I think everybody knows that the industry's been through a tumultuous period. I think back in the time when I last did telecast, we were all worried about what was about to come with the industry and everything being in lockdown. As it happens, we had that boom post-COVID. And the way I describe it is, I think pre-COVID, we imagined that the TV industry was on a seesaw and that the streamers would sort of go up in their spending and that the linear channels would go down, but they'd sort of balance themselves out. We'd get the money from the streamers that we were losing from the linear channels. Actually, what happened, which was something of a miracle, is that both sides of the seesaw went up at the same time. So we saw money going up on linear and money going up on the streamers. And it was a halcyon period, although unfortunately it was a blip. And now what we've seen, post-COVID, post-Brexit, post a war in Europe, post-economic downturn and cost of living crisis, and now with a writers and an actors strike, is that both sides of the seesaw have come down at the same time. So we're seeing the streamers don't have money because subscriptions are down and therefore budgets are down, and the broadcasters don't have money because advertising revenue is down. And so we're in this unfortunate perfect storm where everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. Having said all of that, go back to your original question, how was Zig Zag? As they say in America, we zig while others zag. So we've had to find ways to pivot and do things in a different way. Some of that has involved doing more work in other countries. Our key markets have always been the UK and the US. But one thing I've learned is when America sneezes, we catch a cold. And if you think it's bad in the UK right now, I mean, the US market is absolutely flat. So we've been working in, let's say, maybe less fashionable places, and sometimes one could say morally questionable places, or whether you would choose to work there or not. But we've been producing a series in China, majority funded by the Chinese. We're also working in Saudi Arabia, which I think a lot of people are now looking at. And actually, there's a bit of a space race going on in the Middle East. So between the Saudis, the Qataris, the Bahrainis, they're all offering incentives to film there. And then we've always had a good relationship in South Africa, and we've continued to develop and progress there, and also in Israel. So the short answer, which I've given you a very long-winded answer, is we are looking at other territories, and we're doing more brand-funded content. We've been doing more feature documentaries. which is a new area for us, but there are tax incentives for those theatrical release documentaries. And we are talking to a lot of investment funds who are interested in investing, especially in feature documentaries. So that in a nutshell is how is Zig Zag.
Right. Okay. Well, I've always known you as an entrepreneurial producer, Danny, and it doesn't surprise me that rather than waiting for the market to come back, you're going out there and finding the opportunities in probably more obscure places and building relationships and building new clients out there. In terms of the content that you're producing, you've been well known for working in the sports space as well as factual and factual entertainment. Are those still the genres that you're very much focused on?
They're definitely key genres for us. Zig Zag will be going into its 25th year from November. I think a lot of the companies that were around when we started no longer exist, or they've been consumed into other companies. So we've had to keep writing the next chapter of the story. We have to keep reinventing ourselves to stay relevant. Sport has always been a strong suit for us because we're passionate sports fans, and sports documentaries in particular have become, a very big genre. True crime is a genre we've got into sort of relatively recently, but, as you see, it's still a very strong genre. There are a lot of territories buying true crime. Feature documentaries, whether they be sport, true crime or other, I think is a new area for us. We continue to do fact and entertainment formats, but I would say that where historically we've tried to be 50-50 formats to factual, during the post-pandemic years, I think factual has been a stronger suit for us, and it's a quicker reach and an easier goal. So I'd say on balance we've been doing more factual across the board, but we're looking to sort of ramp up our format side again.
Coming back to what you were saying about both sides of the seesaw coming down at the same time, I think it's a really good analogy, really good description of the scenario that the industry finds itself in right now. The one thing that you didn't mention was PSBs. And PSBs feel to me, as an onlooker in this space, is that they've always been there. They've always had their budgets, although reducing slightly. But they feel a little bit more of a force now because, their budgets are more ring-fenced and less subject to market conditions than a lot of the commercial broadcasters. I mean, is that an accurate statement, do you think? Is that how you're seeing it?
I think it's a good point you make, and obviously they're less at the whim of market forces. Unfortunately, and I'm talking specifically here about the UK, but I think this is actually globally an issue. PSBs are under more political pressure than they've ever been. The license fee will be up for renewal. There's obviously been a lot of pressure on Channel 4 and BBC, who are both, have PSB remits from government. The BBC have stated publicly they need to slash their budgets considerably. And Channel 4, has been in this state of paralysis for quite a while now. And, people are obviously hoping and waiting for Channel 4 to open up the purse strings again. Unfortunately, I wish that the PSBs were the saving grace, but they're not, and actually the UK PSBs are stronger than most international ones. PBS in America has been under, a lot of pressure, particularly from the previous government, from Trump's regime. But if you look at audience share and budget of PSBs globally, unfortunately, it's been coming down.
Well, coming back to what you were saying about going to the more farther flung markets and less obvious markets, let's say, China, certainly for UK producers, has always seemed to be quite a hard nut to crack. I mean, you're looking at it, huge opportunity, massive middle class, and just a huge market to access. With that comes an awful lot of challenges. We've seen format theft. We've seen over the years, lots of other challenges when it comes to IP. And actually, the understanding of how the Chinese market and the UK producer can work together. And we also, obviously, we've seen censorship, completely change the game at a moment's notice. So it's interesting to see that you're going back in there at a time when arguably UK and China government relations is at its lowest ebb for a number of years. How are you getting that project going? And do you need to set up a joint venture, or how does that work?
I mean, sometimes out of adversity comes opportunity, and again, in the name Zig Zag, to go in the opposite direction to other people. I think a lot of people, a lot of British producers especially, gave up on China. I think it became very, very difficult to get projects away there. And in all honesty, I think Zig Zag had probably been to China in the 5 years pre the pandemic about a dozen times. And somebody once said to me, you need to do 23 meetings before you get a show away in China, which, I don't think many people have got the time or the energy to do that. And because of the pandemic, obviously we weren't going to China, and we were sort of at the point where, we thought we should focus our energies elsewhere. But the beauty of our industry, and maybe the beauty of the longevity of our company, is that you plant a lot of seeds and you don't know where the shoots are going to pop up. And we'd been talking for a number of years about doing a travel adventure series in China following the Great Wall. And it actually happened that we partnered up with Bowman Bridge, who are a Singapore-based company with very good relationships in China. And they had a young talent, Ash Dykes, who's a young up-and-coming British adventurer, Bear Grylls, if you would like, for the 21st century. And Ash had actually done a show walking the Yangtze previously in China, so he was well liked in China. He actually learned Mandarin, which was quite an amazing thing. So they brought Ash, and they brought their relationship, and they were prepared to also bring some funding. They helped broker the deal with CICC and CCTV in China, who already knew us and knew of this project for several years. And we managed to do a deal to do the post-production in Australia. I mean, this is the nature of doing deals these days, is you have to come up with quite complex patchwork of partners. And then, of course, as soon as we got the project up and running, we went into lockdown. It's been a project that's been blighted by lockdown, and the lockdown in China has been more severe than many other places. So Ash went in. We weren't able to send anybody else in other than the presenter. We had to hire local English-speaking crew. Ash was in lockdown for 3 weeks, I think, initially when he went in. They went in and out of lockdown during the production. But we managed to follow the route of the Great Wall through mountain, jungle, desert, and underwater. And we're just, as I speak, delivering the final episodes of the series, and it'll be released at MIPCOM. It's been a circuitous route, not quite as long as following the wall through 7,000 miles, but it feels like it's been that long. And yeah, our persistence has paid off.
Well, that's a good analogy for the efforts that you've gone through to make the show work. And how's that working for distribution outside of China? Do you retain the rights to do that, or how's the Bowman Bridge relationship work when it comes to distribution rights?
Yeah, so Bowman Bridge have the distribution rights outside of China. CCTV, I think, will be airing it on their documentary channel in China as of next month. So in and around MIPCOM, and Bowman Bridge obviously will be selling it hard at MIPCOM. And we have already some UK, Australian, US interest in it. So we're very hopeful.
It's a great story. I mean, when it comes to the other territories you mentioned,
yes,
how does doing business in Bahrain or Saudi or Qatar or some of these other territories, how does doing business in the Middle East differ? You're talking about incentives, and I think it's a huge opportunity for any producer now to look at incentives that are offered right around the world and see how that can enable their project to work from a financial perspective. But when you're doing deals with local broadcasters, local producers, are you finding specifically in the Middle East that is an easy relationship? Because what we're talking is, you as a very experienced UK producer going into a market that doesn't traditionally partner with the UK or commission, for example, UK-based projects. How's that work for you?
I think it's a very complicated market, and it's not a market Zig Zag had been very active in previously. I mean, we had sold some formats there, but we'd never produced anything in the Middle East. As I said, with the UK and the US markets being very flat, it doesn't take much to notice that the Middle East is very active, not just in the media space, but as we're seeing in the sports space as well, with the World Cup having been in Qatar, the Saudi football explosion. And so we, tentatively started to make approaches. And what I found out was that there is a bit of a space race happening in the Middle East. So I think, Dubai and Abu Dhabi were the first movers, and they offered incentives, and a lot of producers have been producing in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. But what the Bahrainis have been doing is they've been offering, I believe, sort of 30% cash rebate to go and film in Bahrain. And then the Qataris, trying to be competitive, have been offering up to 40% cash rebate. And then the Saudis, wishing to trump everybody, have been offering 50% cash rebate, which obviously, for any producer is attractive. But even more so, if you've ever sort of done co-pros that are based on tax rebates, such as in Canada, it's a very paper-heavy, form-filling in process of which you may not even get your rebate for months or years afterwards. And if you don't fill in the paperwork correctly, you don't get it at all. What I found out in Saudi, and it's via having lots of conversations with lots of different people and meeting and talking to a lot of producers and state bodies, is that with Saudi, and this is based on spend in Saudi, they'll actually give you the rebate up front, or quite a lot of it up front. So you have your money to make your production in advance rather than having to wait to claim it back, which is also very attractive. With Saudi, we've been talking with various state bodies, but then also talking to various producers, and in the end, the planets lined up as such that there was a producer that really wanted to partner with us, and there was a studio that wanted us to go and film there. And we've actually, myself and a couple of colleagues, have been out to Saudi about a month ago. I mean, it was an amazing experience, quite an eye-opener of an experience. One day we drove, I think, 5.5 hours in the desert without seeing any other life, no humans, no animals, no buildings. It was vast expanse of desert. But they have built some incredible facilities there. And as I speak, we're exploring the opportunity of certainly starting or doing our first production in Saudi. And I don't believe we're the only people who are considering that. Also, a lot of their studios are geared up for movies. And because of the writers' strike, I think there may be more opportunities for unscripted projects in Saudi at the moment. We haven't closed our first deal, so it'd be slightly premature of me to say that we are ahead of the curve. But, as we said earlier, we are constantly just trying to seek out where there are opportunities to get projects away. And if there is a place where you can match fund your projects, then, you'd be foolish not to consider it. Now, obviously, there are producers and there are broadcasters who may not be that keen to do projects in Saudi Arabia, which I do understand. My justification to myself is that the project that we are doing is forward thinking and would be culturally advancing thinking in Saudi Arabia, and on that basis I do feel comfortable in considering making productions there.
It's really interesting looking forward as the world changes as well, Danny, when it comes to political issues around the world, and also not only that, but looking at countries like India, who are going to be a superpower if they're not already, and all of these markets that up to this point have not really been the first choice for a producer. Obviously, we know Bollywood and the size of the industry in India. It's surely only a matter of time until India becomes a legitimate market. And when I say legitimate, I mean a genuine commercial opportunity for UK producers to create premium content for and with Indian partners. And many of these countries, as you say, do have regimes or other issues that don't necessarily align with traditional Western issues. And that's potentially just something that we're going to have to get used to, isn't it? You talk about the BRIC economies, and that's really, they seem to be really gathering speed now and becoming real players on the international marketplace, and more so in content.
I went to India in December of last year on holiday, but I managed to tag on about half a dozen meetings.
Of course you would, Danny. I wouldn't expect anything else of you.
Just to get the temperature of the industry there. And look, there is money in India. English is the most spoken language, I believe, even though obviously there are a lot of other languages and dialects there. But there's a commonality. Most of the people in the TV industry do speak English. They in India obviously have had historically a similar reputation to China, that, difficult to sell into, a lot of copycat formats, etc. But I think they are definitely emerging as a superpower within the media industry. I think there's a lot of Bollywood films now being filmed in the UK, and I am keeping close tabs on India as an emerging market, but I wouldn't as yet put India on the same par as the Middle East countries, because they're not quite offering the same incentives to UK producers that the Middle East countries are. And I suppose, the nature of our business is we are an international business. As you very kindly said, I've always been very internationally focused, but I've always tried to look beyond our borders at where the opportunities are. British producers especially are very highly thought of internationally, and it's about trying to tap into where those opportunities are. And stocks do rise and fall. I went on a pack trip also to Brazil and to Russia as well, and I thought that those other BRIC countries, Brazil and Russia, would emerge. And for obvious reasons, with Russia's situation, that hasn't emerged. And with Brazil, it's a very unique market. It's a Portuguese-speaking market, and it's quite hard to crack. So it's about just trying to monitor where are the places that offer the best opportunities.
So what we're talking about is obviously being more entrepreneurial, but also trying to find savings and taking opportunity of those investments, because as we know, TV is a pretty expensive thing to produce when you're a manufacturer of TV content. Is that your advice to other indies then in terms of weathering this storm? Because it is pretty difficult. Everybody speaking to is finding the same situation, and you're obviously looking further afield and reaping the rewards of work that you've done in the past and travel that you've done in the past. But in terms of UK indies now, in terms of creating content, they may have to be creating for different clients, but also potentially working with different price points that they might prefer to be working with. Is that the focus, do you think, for UK indies, is to look more towards cost savings and become more entrepreneurial in order to weather this storm?
Look, I think that is a necessity, and I don't want to overstate our success, because in reality, it's a struggle. It's a battle for us as much as anybody else. And I admire anybody who can keep their head above water. And in the period since we last spoke, Justin, there's been a number of significant production companies who no longer exist. Icon Films, a company I admired greatly, and several others, who've disappeared. And I do worry, not just for ourselves, but I worry generally that the longer this situation goes on, the more companies are going to struggle. Whether that's true independent companies like ourselves who don't have the safety net, of a parent company, or bigger conglomerates who will slowly but surely do away with certain brands to make things more cost effective. Yes, a key is to try and make production cheaper, but the problem is if you make production cheaper, your margins will go down. So it becomes even more difficult to make a profit, and it becomes a vicious circle. Hence, my view is, I've always said, don't sweat the small stuff. Try and find where the money is, which is easier said than done, and try and keep making stuff at the level that you're making it at. One of the other territories that I mentioned that we're working in, South Africa, I've got a lot of time and enthusiasm for South Africa as a market, because they've got some very talented practitioners there. It's very cheap to produce content there, and again, it's an English-speaking market. So at MIPCOM, we are going to be meeting up with our South African partners, and we are planning to produce a show in South Africa, hopefully, in the next few months. Again, it's not easy for every producer to jump on a plane and go and visit these places, but one of the positive byproducts of the pandemic is you can contact anybody now virtually, and I think it's more about a mindset and not thinking within your own borders.
So we're also looking at the rise of AI, and everyone's talking about artificial intelligence in TV production, and the number of events that are focusing on this very subject over the next few months is crazy. They can't seem to turn a corner without one. How's your relationship with AI? Are you utilizing AI at this point, and can you see yourself doing more of it in the future? I suppose that's an obvious question.
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm a Luddite, so I'm almost the worst person to ask the question to, even though I'm chairing a panel on it at the PAC conference tomorrow. But I trust in the people who work with me who are more tech savvy, and they are telling me that we are using AI in many different ways, whether it's using ChatGPT to come up with titles for shows or even ideas for shows, to writing, transcript of shows or translating shows. I saw this quote recently as a sneak preview of what I was going to say tomorrow. I love this quote, which is AI won't replace you, but someone using it will. And I really think that it'd be naive not to embrace it. And I think obviously a lot of the press around AI has been AI is coming for your job. AI is going to replace you. And I think that's the narrative that we need to change. We need to look at what the pros are of AI, what the future is of AI, and how we can embrace it. And as somebody said to me the other day, for the Gen Z future people in our industry, AI is going to be second nature to them. They're just, it's just going to be something they're going to use without thinking. So the sooner we embrace it, the better.
So a prompt engineer might be a key member of the core production team going forward.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, look, something that has been made clear to me is that AI doesn't actually need to replace jobs in television. But what it can do is it can make jobs that are mundane easier to do, like transcription or logging, or graphics generation, stuff that's quite laborious and sometimes boring. It can make that stuff more efficient without you having to lose people.
And now it's time for Story of the Week, where Danny gets to choose the TV industry story that's caught his eye in the past 7 days. Danny, what's your story of the week?
My story of the week is gamekeepers turned poachers against the backdrop of mass redundancies across all the broadcasters, all the streaming platforms, all the talent agencies. But I've noticed this week, Dan Grabner, who's somebody I've got a lot of admiration for, who's done an amazing job at Amazon in the UK, has announced he's leaving to set up a production company, Orchard. I also noticed Daniel Pearl, who's done an incredible job at Paramount Channel 5, is leaving to join Lion, and our friend Solange Atwood at Blue Ant is also leaving to set up her own venture. And I admire all of these people. I personally wouldn't want to be setting up a production company in the current climate. I think it's a difficult market, to say the least. So it does fascinate me at this time why high-flying executives who are working within networks or broadcasters or platforms would choose to become producers at this time.
It's a good point. I guess for many producers, the thought of a really well-known commissioner being on the market with the intelligence and the knowledge that they've got and the ideas that they must have is a rolling eye, kind of, no, not another competitor who's probably got some great ideas that I'm going to have to go up against.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a constant thing, and what surprises me is the speed and the volume of the amount of people who are coming out of the gamekeeper side to the poaching side. I honestly don't believe that the market's big enough to sustain the amount of companies that are in it, but it will be, Lord of the Flies. It'll be survival of the fittest.
Interesting time to leave a big ship and set out on your own little sailboat in stormy seas.
The best of times and the worst of times, yeah.
Danny, now it's time for Hero of the Week.
Well, I was really torn on this one, and I've actually cheated, and I've got two. These people are media adjacent, but they're people offering hope in dire times. The first one is Fergal Sharkey, who's gone from pop star to anti-water pollution star. And there's been a big issue in the UK recently about the pollution in water. And a good heart these days is hard to find. But with Fergal, we found somebody who's become a champion holding the government to task on the quality of water and the pollution that is in that water in this country. The other person who's a hero, which won't surprise you, is Big Ange Postecoglou, the first Australian to coach in the English Premier League. And he is coach of my beloved Tottenham Hotspur. And he's offered me hope where there was no hope. And we had some turgid, terrible managers recently. And he's just made watching football enjoyable again for me. So he's very much my hero of the week. And he's also given 2 players to Leeds on loan. So you should be happy as well, Justin.
I'm very happy about that, Danny. And I was actually, when you talk about Vögelschöcke, I was desperately trying to think about song titles to come in. I can only think of, Jimmy Jimmy and Teenage Kicks and
My Perfect Cousin.
My Perfect Cousin. That's right. Yeah, but I couldn't make any of them work into a gag. But there we are. On your point on Spurs, how does it feel to be no longer one of the big 6, Danny?
I don't know. I don't think that's true, Justin. I think this is our comeback year. Watch this space. I think we're going to be right up there.
Without Harry Kane,
we're better without him. You can't be a one-man team, as Pep Guardiola said. We were the Harry Kane team. We've shared the responsibility now among other players, and James Maddison is an unbelievable player. I didn't realise how good he was. Steal of the century.
Well, I'm sure we're going to carry on more football talk, Danny, at MIPCOM and at one of the many events that I know that you're attending over the next few weeks. Good luck with, battling the high seas of the TV industry right now. It's always great to get some ideas and to speak to somebody who's really going above and beyond and looking perhaps outside the more obvious places to build their business and to take their business forward. So hopefully that's given a few tips, a few ideas for listening producers. Maybe look to other markets and other genres and other opportunities wider afield than your immediate territory. But thanks again, Danny. All the best. Great to speak to you. And hopefully next time when we speak to you on the show, we'll be in the broad sunlit uplands of a TV boom.
And Tottenham will be top of the league.
There we go. All right. Cheers, Danny.
Cheers, Justin.
Well, we've reached the end of this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. Next week, we're talking artificial intelligence in TV production and finding out which are the key tools that producers should be using. Until then, stay safe.